This is a story all about how Vader flipped our lives right upside down. Now I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became king, yes, the media air. On the planet Tatooine, born and raised, in the workshop is where he spent most of his days, building up robots and pod racers, cool. Working for this dude, but never in school. Couple of guys who were stranded real good. Showed up unexpected in the neighborhood. He entered one little race, and it's goodbye sand. You see, he's moving with these Jedis to a whole other land. His menacing days are beginning to near. He's got mask, cape, and breathing for instilling fear. You thought his fatherhood role was what made him rare, but now let's look to the history to find the real scare. For those of you who don't know, that was a parody of the opening to The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, a 90s sitcom. The recognizable nature of the song in and of itself is evidence of the power that media yields over its viewers. Now, Fresh Prince actually has ties to what we're about to talk about, so stay with me here, and we will come back to that. In Class 8, we discussed Star Wars breeding distrust in children towards their parents, because it presented possibility for a parent to be evil. This video will explore an alternative interpretation of Star Wars media influence. We'll begin by looking at evil fathers in stories throughout history. Then we will explore how Vader was indeed different, how that bridges the gap between sitcoms of the 70s and 90s, and what changed as a result. Finally, we will consider the impact this has on our theology. The quality of parent-child interactions is clearly seen throughout research to have impact on the development of undesirable behaviors. With that said, however, there have always been evil fathers throughout history. In Greek mythology, Kronos, the father of Zeus, ate his children. Laius, Oedipus's father, sends a baby to die. In Shakespeare, King Lear disinherits and banishes his single daughter, who is likely to starve in poverty. In Prince Caspian, King Miraz raises Caspian, has a son, and then tries to do away with him. There are plenty of examples throughout writing. So, if it's not that parents can be evil, why was Vader different? To understand the conflict, we need to understand how it is resolved. Now, I know that those who originally saw it would not have known the resolution at the time, but it speaks to what the real conflict that they were aware of really was. The conflict is eventually resolved when Vader has a moment of love for his son and saves his life. So the real issue here is not parents committing evil acts, but parental love. All of the other fathers or father figures mentioned had motives or needs that trumped their love. Kronos ate his children in order to maintain his throne. His motive then is for the sake of self-preservation. Laius also sought self-preservation after an oracle that he would be killed by his own child. For King Lear, it was an issue of pride. With Miraz, his love for his own son and desire for him to be heir was greater than his care of raising his nephew to be heir. Should he have not produced offspring, things would have been different. Additionally, excluding Kronos, these fathers indirectly cause harm and are not directly trying to kill. Miraz hires people and attacks through large-scale war, where he is not likely to face Caspian personally in combat. King Lear banishes his daughter. Being that she is on her own, she may even survive, although it's highly unlikely given that time period. Laius sends someone else to do it. But Vader, on the other hand, shows complete lack of love for Luke and attacks directly, without having any overridden motive. He abandoned him without cause, despite the fact that Luke was no real threat at the time. As Dr. Robinson said, he went in way too early, so even at the time of the iconic cinematic scene, Luke's still not really a threat. There was already distrust towards parents. The narrative isn't, oh, my parent might be evil. The new narrative is actually a question of, when my parent does bad things, which all humans do, does it indicate a lack of love for me? So we see the free love movement of the 70s turn into a hyper-masculine, I don't need love, macho attitude of the 90s. Because if I don't need it, there's no pain if it's not there. We We can see this reflected in the cultural sitcoms. Family sitcom programming was created in the post-World War II period. The loving families of shows from the 70s, The Brady Bunch, The Waltons, The Partridge Family, Little House on the Prairie, etc., where these parents occasionally do things wrong but are extremely loving, turns into the abandoned lack of love of the 90s. Now, Little House on the Prairie in particular is an interesting one, as in the finale, following the release of Star Wars a few years later, there is a conflict involving the return of a father who abandoned his son. In the 90s, we see shows like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air centered on a young man with an uninvolved father. By 1997, Fresh Prince had become the second best-selling U.S. sitcom on the international market, clearly signifying its global cultural relevance. Fresh Prince follows the story of a young teenager who was raised in the inner city of Philadelphia and now lives with rich relatives in Bel-Air, causing tension as his lifestyle and values conflict with the upper middle class values he is now embedded within. There is an iconic scene between Will and his dad that ends with him leaving yet again, and Will seeking solace in a hug from Uncle Phil, after trying to shake off the events as he questions why his father doesn't want him. In Boy Meets World, there is Sean Hunter, whose father is constantly in and out of the picture. Midway through the series, in Season 4, Sean asks his father, Chet, why he isn't enough for him to stick around town. Years later, when Chet is in the hospital, Sean asks why he wasn't good enough for him. Later on, after Chet's death, Sean goes to visit him at the graveyard and has a conversation with Chet's spirit, where they discuss that even though he might have done bad things, they still love each other. On the female side of things, there are shows like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, whose parents desert her to live with her aunts. In Boy Meets World and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, there is an element of adult advising present from role models who step into the place of these absent parents. However, ultimately the teenagers must make their own decisions. Cultural historians have demonstrated that the introduction of television played an active role in constructing and later in deconstructing the boundaries of the isolated nuclear family. By the late 80s, single mothers such as Murphy Brown began to appear, that challenged understandings of family gender expectations. By the end of the 90s, both Boy Meets World and Sabrina the Teenage Witch were rated as top shows in the ABC TGIF lineup. These changes and strains with parents do reflect Vader's impact, but not because parents are now more open about making the wrong choices. As you can see, conflict becomes focused around parental absence or lack of involvement. It isn't a question of whether or not my parent is good, bad, trustworthy, or untrustworthy, but about whether or not doing wrong means they don't love me. Now, the fear of Vader is just a mask to this subconscious pain that we as humans don't want to deal with because, quite frankly, we're scared of the answer. Some even argue that it was Anakin's own struggle regarding his mother's death that led him to become Vader in the first place. An unhealthy attachment forming with her after a life without a father. This part of the series, of course, being written in the 90s. Studies such as these explore how unhealthy parental bonds create deviant behavior. Some argue that politicians and social scientists appear to have collaboratively, albeit perhaps somewhat unintentionally, swayed public attention towards family values displayed on 50s sitcoms rather than searching for the good that is present in new family dynamics found within society. It is these aforementioned studies that contribute to this mindset. Theology-wise, there has always been a debate as to whether people are good or bad. We've discussed how the Jesuits have typically had the more optimistic view in relation to this. But Vader suddenly confronts the revivalist mindset of the States that Henry Alime brought his own flavor of to Canada, where people were told to embrace God as Father. Not because a father can be evil, but because being a father no longer means that he's required to love. We know God cannot have a motive that would trump his love for us, but suddenly Vader suggests that he doesn't need motive. Therefore, the nation is left questioning whether or not God loves. It also means that he doesn't need to love Jesus, and the penal substitution style mindset that Align attempted to combat suddenly takes on much darker tones. So, Jamie, I'm sorry that I felt confident enough in my parents' love to be able to wear a Vader costume, and that you did not. But the good news is your dad did go to church just to hear you preach, so that's a good indication that he probably does love you. Now, your mom, on the other hand, might be a different story for all I know. But that's none of my business. So which theory do you feel is more accurate? Is Vader a representation of distrust, or is he a representation of a lack of love? Or might there even be a third option? And how do these impact our theology?